Hello and welcome to Learn Flaunt British English. Today we're exploring 10 reasons why your English isn't improving and how to fix them. If you've been learning English for a while but feel stuck, don't worry. Many learners face the same challenge. Let's uncover what might be slowing your progress. One common mistake is focusing too much on grammar and vocabulary without actually speaking English. The best way to improve is by using English every day. Try talking to yourself, shadowing native speakers, or joining online conversation groups. Let's get started.
Okay, so we're back for another deep dive. And today, we're going to tackle something I know a lot of you guys are thinking about a lot, which is, improving your English,
Yeah,
taking it to that next level.
absolutely.
And you guys sent in this really interesting piece called 10 Reasons Why Your English Isn't Improving from Learn Fluent British English.
Right.
Which is a fantastic resource, by the way.
Yeah.
If you guys haven't checked them out, you should.
Definitely.
And so we're going to go through those 10 reasons, but we're not just going to kind of list them off.
Yeah.
We're going to really dig into why they're important and what you can do about it if you are experiencing those things.
Exactly.
So consider this our roadmap to breaking through any English learning plateaus you might be facing.
Absolutely. And I think what's so fascinating about these 10 points is that they really get to the heart of the less obvious hurdles that people face when they're learning a language, because it's not always about just memorizing vocabulary lists.
Right.
It's about so much more than that.
Yeah.
It's about the application. It's about the mindset you bring to it.
Totally.
And, these reasons, they really highlight that.
Yeah, and it's a lot of times I think people feel like they're putting in the effort, but they're just not seeing the results. And this kind of explains why that might be.
Right.
So let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
Number one is you're not speaking enough,
Okay.
which seems pretty obvious, right?
Yes.
But it's easy to get caught up in the grammar and the vocab.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, wait, I actually have to speak this language.
Yeah, totally. You can get stuck in that textbook land
Totally.
where you're just doing exercises and you're filling in the blanks and stuff.
Yeah.
And then you get out in the real world and it's like, whoa, this is totally different.
Right.
So why is that? Why is actually speaking the language so crucial?
Well, if think about it like any other skill, like learning to play an instrument.
Right?
You could study music theory all day long. But if you never actually pick up the instrument and play it, you're not going to get any better.
You're not going to be a musician.
Right.
Exactly.
So it's the same thing with language.
Yeah.
It's that active, using the language that actually helps you improve.
Absolutely. It's that active workout for your language muscles.
Yeah.
And that's where you actually start to, put all that grammar and vocabulary that you've been studying into practice.
Right.
Identify gaps, build fluency, that kind of thing.
So the solution they give in Learn Fluent British English is to engage in daily speaking.
Okay.
And they suggest things like talking to yourself, which I'm still not sure how I feel about that one.
I know it sounds a little bit strange,
Yeah.
but it actually can be very effective.
Yeah.
Shadowing native speakers and then joining online conversation groups. So when you look at those suggestions, what do you think is the core benefit there?
I think it's that word daily.
Yes.
It's like making it a part of your routine.
Insistent.
Even if it's just for a few minutes. Like you're getting that practice in, and over time, that's what's really going to make a difference.
Absolutely. And I think talking to yourself, as weird as it may feel,
Right.
it's a really great way to kind of rehearse sentences in your head and try out different phrases. And, even if you make mistakes, it's just you, so it's okay.
Yeah, no one's listening.
Exactly. And then with the shadowing, that's where you're listening to a native speaker and you're trying to repeat what they're saying.
Right.
At the same time, so you're really tuning your ear to the pronunciation, the rhythm of the language.
Yeah.
And then online conversation groups, that's where you get that real world interaction, actually using English to communicate with other people.
Yeah, which can be scary, but also so valuable.
Yeah, definitely.
So number two is something I think we all struggle with to some degree, which is you're afraid of making mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
That fear can be so paralyzing.
It can be, and it can be so interesting because, sometimes people will know a lot of English or they'll have studied a lot.
Right.
But then they'll get into a situation where they have to actually use it and they just freeze up.
Totally.
Because they're so afraid of making a mistake and sounding silly.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us who are perfectionists or we want to get it right.
Right.
We're so worried about, like, sounding stupid or, like, not being perfect that it prevents us from actually using the language.
It does. And what's so important to realize is that mistakes are actually a really important part of the learning process.
Yeah.
Every time you make a mistake, it's an opportunity to learn and to refine your understanding of the language. And there's actually research in language acquisition that talks about something called the affective filter, which is basically your anxiety level can actually impact how much you absorb.
Wow.
So when you're really stressed out and you're afraid of making mistakes, that filter goes up, and it actually makes it harder for you to learn.
Interesting.
So, yeah, mistakes are actually good.
Mistakes are good?
They are. They're your friends.
Okay, so embrace the mistakes.
Exactly.
So the advice here is to shift your focus from perfection to fluency.
Yeah.
And they even say that, native speakers make mistakes all the time.
Oh, all the time, yeah.
So it's about embracing those imperfections.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which can be hard.
It can be, especially if you're used to, trying to get everything exactly right. But, the primary goal of language is communication.
Right.
It's getting your message across. And while accuracy is important in the long run, fluency allows you to practice more, build confidence, and ultimately become more accurate naturally.
Right.
So it's kind of like learning to walk. You stumble, you fall,
right,
but you keep going, and eventually you're walking smoothly.
Okay. I like that analogy.
Yeah.
All right. So number 3 is you're not listening enough.
Okay.
Which, again, kind of makes sense. Right?
Yeah. It does. Yeah. I mean, you need to absorb the language if you want to understand it and speak it well.
Exactly. And it's not just about hearing the words. It's about understanding the pronunciation.
Yeah.
Like the natural flow of the language.
Absolutely.
The music of it.
The intonation, the pauses, the rhythm, all of those things are so important.
Yeah. And I think that's something that, if you're just focused on, like, reading and writing,
right,
you might miss out on.
Totally. And so what they suggest is to immerse yourself in British English audio.
Okay.
So things like podcasts, audiobooks, TV shows. And they really encourage people to try to imitate native speakers.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And it can feel a little bit awkward at first.
For sure.
But it's really effective because when you're imitating the sounds and the rhythms you hear, you're actually training your vocal cords and your ear to recognize and reproduce those subtle differences.
Wow.
And it's like training your muscles for a specific sport, So by imitating, you're developing the physical and auditory skills that you need for better pronunciation.
Right.
And a more natural speaking style.
It's okay.
And understanding natural speech is so important because it's often so much faster.
Right.
And less clearly enunciated than you might hear in like a classroom setting.
Totally.
So that's why it's so important to really get that exposure to natural speech.
Okay, so number 4 is you rely too much on subtitles.
Interesting.
And I think a lot of us do this.
Yeah, I mean, I know I definitely use subtitles sometimes.
Oh.
Especially if I'm watching something in a foreign language.
Yeah.
But they can become a crutch if you're not careful.
Right.
They can definitely be a useful tool.
Yeah.
Especially for initial comprehension. But if you're constantly relying on subtitles, your brain isn't really engaging with the auditory aspect of the language.
Right. It's like you're reading it instead of hearing it.
Exactly. And it's like using training wheels on a bicycle for too long.
Okay.
You never fully develop your balance.
I like that. So the solution they give is to gradually reduce your dependence on subtitles.
Okay.
So start with them maybe, and then try watching without them to kind of train your ears.
Yeah, it's about making it a conscious effort to really listen to what's being said.
Right.
And it's going to be difficult at first.
Sure.
But the more you do it, the better you'll get at it.
Like anything, right?
Exactly.
It's practice.
It is.
Okay. Number 5 is you're translating everything, which I am very guilty of.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do this, especially when they're first starting out.
Yeah.
Learning a new language.
Yeah, my brain just like automatically goes back to Spanish. I'm like, wait, no, think in English.
Right. And it can be really hard to break that habit.
Yeah.
So why do you think that is? Why is this constant translation such a barrier?
Well, because you're basically adding this extra step in your brain. So instead of just understanding and responding in English, you're going from English to Spanish to English again.
Exactly. You're adding that extra layer of processing, and that can really slow down your thinking and your speaking.
Yeah, it makes it sound less natural, too.
It does, and it prevents you from truly thinking in English, which is really the goal if you want to become fluent.
So what do we do about it?
So what they suggest is to consciously practice thinking directly in English.
Okay.
And to make a habit of describing your surroundings in English.
So like narrate your life in English.
Exactly. So, if you're walking down the street, you can be like, okay, I see a red car.
Right.
I see a tall building. Just kind of get in the habit of thinking in English as much as possible.
Interesting.
And it might feel a little bit strange at first,
Yeah.
but the more you do it, the more natural it will become.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So number 6 is you don't have a learning routine.
Okay.
Which I think is a big one.
I think it is too. And it's something that I've definitely struggled with in the past.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
It's like, if I'm trying to learn something new.
Right.
And I don't have a schedule for it.
Yeah.
It just kind of falls by the wayside.
It does.
It's like anything else.
Right.
You need to make time for it.
You do. You need to make it a priority.
Yeah.
And sporadic learning is just not as effective as consistent learning.
Right. It's like if you're trying to get in shape and you only work out once a month.
Yeah, you're not going to see the results.
You're not going to see the results.
That you would if you were working out 3 or 4 times a week.
Totally.
It's the same with language learning. You need to be consistent.
Yeah.
If you want to see results.
So what do they suggest?
So they say to create a daily learning routine.
Okay.
Even if it's just for 15 or 30 minutes. Just make it a habit to do something every day.
Yeah.
That will help you improve your English.
It's that consistent effort over time that really makes a difference.
Absolutely. It's about those small steps.
Right.
That you take every day that add up to big results in the long run.
I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, number 7 is using the wrong study methods. And they talk about how sometimes people get too focused on like memorizing grammar rules.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that.
Yeah.
Where people are so focused on getting the grammar perfect that they forget that language is actually about communication.
Right. It's like learning all the parts of a car, but never actually driving it.
Exactly. You can know all the rules.
Yeah.
But if you don't know how to apply them in real life,
right,
then it's not really useful.
So what's the solution?
So they recommend adopting a mix of learning methods.
Okay.
So speaking, writing, and reading in English every day. So it's about having that holistic approach.
Yeah, I like that.
And, each of these skills complements and reinforces the others.
Right.
So, reading exposes you to new vocabulary and grammatical structures and context.
Yeah.
Listening improves your comprehension and your pronunciation. Right.
Writing helps you solidify your understanding of grammar and sentence construction. And speaking puts it all into practice.
Right. It's like they all work together.
Exactly, they do.
Okay. So number 8 is not using English in real life.
Okay.
So, you can study all the textbooks you want, but if you're not actually using English to communicate with people,
right,
then it's not really serving its purpose.
Yeah, it's like you're learning all this theory, but you're never actually putting it into practice.
Right.
And language is a social tool.
Right.
It's meant to be used to interact with other people. So you really need to find opportunities to use English in real-life situations.
So what are some ways that people can do that?
So they suggest joining English-speaking groups.
Okay.
Using language exchange apps where you can connect with people who are learning your native language.
Right.
And they're trying to learn English.
Yeah.
And you can kind of help each other out.
Yeah.
And even just practicing self-talk.
Just talking to yourself in English about your day, about your plans, about anything, really.
So even going back to that first one.
Exactly. Yeah. It all ties together.
It does.
Yeah.
All right. So number 9 is getting discouraged too easily.
Oh, yeah.
And I think this is a big one because learning a language can feel like a really long process.
It can.
It's not something that happens overnight.
Absolutely not.
And so it's easy to get discouraged if you're not seeing results right away.
Yeah. And it can be hard to stay motivated when you feel like you're not making progress.
So what can people do about that?
Well, first of all, it's important to remember that progress is often gradual.
Right.
And it's not always immediately apparent.
Yeah.
So you may be making more progress than you realize, but you're just not seeing it yet.
And I think comparison is a big one, too.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, you see other people who seem to be learning faster than you.
Yeah. Or you see people who are already fluent, and you're like, oh, my gosh, I'll never get there.
Right.
But it's important to remember that everyone learns at their own pace.
Yeah.
And there's no right or wrong way to learn a language.
Yeah.
So the important thing is to focus on your own progress and to celebrate your achievements.
And be patient.
Yeah.
Okay, so cultivate patience. Look for those small improvements.
Yes.
And try not to get discouraged.
Exactly. And, Sometimes it can be helpful to keep a journal
of
your progress.
Yeah.
So that you can look back and see how far you've come.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, because sometimes we forget how much progress we've made.
Right. We're so focused on like what we still need to learn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we forget to appreciate how far we've come.
Okay, so number 10 is not enjoying the process.
Yeah.
And I think this is a big one because if learning feels like a chore, then it's going to be hard to stay motivated.
It is, yeah, because, motivation is so important when you're learning anything really, but especially when you're learning a language.
Yeah.
Because it's a long process.
Right.
And it can be challenging at times. So you need to have that motivation to keep going.
Totally.
So yeah, if you're not enjoying the process, it's going to be really hard to stick with it.
So what do they suggest we do about that?
So they suggest finding ways to make learning fun.
Okay.
So incorporating activities that you already enjoy, like watching films, playing English games, connecting with native speakers online about shared interests.
Yeah, I like that.
So finding things that you genuinely enjoy doing, and then finding ways to incorporate English into those activities.
Right, it's like tricking yourself into learning.
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
But it's a good trick.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's making the process more enjoyable.
Totally.
And when you're enjoying something, you're more likely to stick with it.
Right, and you learn better, too.
You do.
All right, so there you have it. 10 common reasons why your English might not be improving.
Yeah.
What do you think? What are your final thoughts?
I think these are all really valid points.
Yeah.
They highlight the importance of, not just studying the language, but actually using it. And finding ways to make the learning process enjoyable.
Absolutely.
So I think if people can keep these points in mind, they'll be well on their way to improving their English.
I agree. So thinking about those 10 points, which one or two really stand out to you in your own English learning journey?
It's a good question.
Take a moment to think about your current habits and whether any of those potential roadblocks resonate with your experiences.
Yeah, because once you identify the areas where you might be facing challenges, then you can start to implement the strategies and really tailor your learning methods to your own needs.
Exactly.
And make it a more effective and enjoyable experience.
Right, and that's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Finding what works for you, making it fun.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of English learning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And until next time, keep those language muscles working.
Absolutely.
Bye.